Cheney orders Wolfowitz to write a plan, to write a grand strategy, that it was now our destiny, that without the Soviet Union, there is no one who can possibly approach us in military terms. It says that's the way it ought to be, and our policy must be to maintain and expand that we are the new Rome. World War II is, without question, the formation of the American military empire.
Or the United States literally divided the world up into commands. And some American officer was responsible for every region of the world. There was this domino theory. If any of these places fall to communism, then the next place and the next place and the next place will fall as well, and the next thing you know, they're in Missouri.
You see, we had to fight communism wherever it was in the world. So a decision was made that the United States remain militarized permanently.
We lack the weapons to defend ourselves. Build, prepare is the cry. Quickly the government springs into action and initiates a gigantic rearmament program. A program designed to make America the arsenal of democracy.
From that moment on, the American empire was in every corner of the earth.
In Burma and Iceland,
we were going to maintain dominance, not just of Europe, and not just of Japan, but of the entire globe.
We now stand 10 years past the midpoint of a century that has witnessed 4 major wars among great nations. 3 of these involved our own country. We have been compelled to create a permanent armaments industry of vast proportions. 3.5 million men and women are directly engaged in the defense establishment. Now, this conjunction of an immense military establishment and a large arms industry is new in the American experience. We recognize the imperative need for this development, yet we must not fail to comprehend its grave implications.
There is a threat, but we can't measure how much is enough defense spending to stop the Soviet Union. So by the time Eisenhower is president, there is a huge new flow of cash into defense industries.
He was the first to acknowledge that a permanent military establishment would be required during this period, but then unless we could find some kind of breakthrough, that in fact it would end up creating a terrible cost.
The cost of one modern heavy bomber is this: a modern brick school in more than 30 cities.
It has 2 electric power plants, each serving a town of 60,000 population. It has 2 fine, fully equipped hospitals.
We pay for a single fighter plane with 500,000 bushels of wheat.
We pay for a single destroyer with new homes that could have housed more than 8,000 people.
Under the cloud of threatening war, it is humanity hanging from a cross of iron.
My father, as president, had strong guiding principles. He used to say, modern weapons take food from the hungry and shelter from the homeless. And so he was fighting with the Pentagon all the time for asking for too much and Congress for giving it to him.
I don't think we should pay 1 cent for defense more than we have to.
Well, Eisenhower saw us starting to build program after program that was just out of control. And his own ability to shape national security policy was being hemmed in by these forces he couldn't control, and he was the president.
On at least one occasion, Eisenhower was heard to say by those in the room, "God help this country when somebody sits at this desk who doesn't know as much about the military as I do."
My fellow Americans, this evening I come to you with a message of leave-taking and farewell, and to share a few final thoughts with you, my countrymen. We have been compelled to create a permanent armaments industry of vast proportions. 3.5 million men and women are directly engaged in the defense establishment. The total influence, economic, political, even spiritual, is felt in every city, every state house, every office of the federal government. We recognize the imperative need for this development, yet we must not fail to comprehend its grave implications. In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists, and will persist.
President Eisenhower's concern about the military-industrial complex, his words have unfortunately come true. He was worried that priorities are set by what benefits corporations as opposed to what benefits the country.
This collusion is our business. Yes, collusion with the military.
You know, people sometimes think of the defense budget as you got to arm the troops, defend the nation. But for most people that are involved in it, you realize this is business. Competition for contracts between very large corporations.
Industry has to have a bottom line that's black, otherwise their shareholders don't like that. So they have to find ways to interest the government in continuing to buy the product.
People don't understand the larger architecture of how the Pentagon operates.
Mr. Chairman and distinguished members of the committee, I am the U.S. Air Force Program Manager for the Boeing Company.
Let's use the example of buying a weapon like a new fighter plane for the Air Force. The action usually starts in the Pentagon, maybe at the contractor's initiative, but essentially everybody's working together. Once the Air Force buys off on it, then you start flooding money to as many congressional districts as possible, as quickly as possible.
The B-2 bomber has a piece of it made in every single state to make sure that if you ever tried to phase that project out, you will get howls from among the most liberal members of Congress.
I believe in this military. I am urging the Senate to support this bill. $66 billion for our men and women in uniform.
Well, I just want to thank the chairman for working with me and adding $100 million to upgrade 10 additional B-1 bombers.
And that B-1 has been a great asset for the projection of power for
the F-35 Joint Strike Fighter, the F-A-22 Raptor, and
because the military-industrial complex is not two links, it's three. It's the military and the industry and Congress. For a congressman, defense spending means jobs.
Humvees are manufactured in my district in Mishawaka, Indiana by...
Losing 100 defense jobs in his district could mean 500 votes. It's not just the 100 workers, it's their spouses, it's their children. It's the representative's duty to bring home the bacon.
I am also grateful for the work that the House Armed Services Committee has done to fully fund the FA-22 program this year.
God bless our contractors.
All of the top 10 companies had former U.S. officials who had worked in the Pentagon or other parts of the U.S. government on their boards of directors or as their top executives. It's known as the revolving door, and people cash in all the time. Public officials go to work for companies, and they make triple, quadruple, 10 times, sometimes as much money as they used to make in public service.
There's too close a relationship, and there's outright, I hate to use the word corruption, but it borders on it, the behavior of some of these individuals, both in industry and in the Pentagon.
The #1 recipient of contracts was Vice President Cheney's former company, Halliburton, and its subsidiary, Kellogg Brown & Root.
KBR. We're the Army's contractor on the battlefield. Currently 65,000 KBR people around the world assisting the troops. And 10 of what?
The American way of war has been described as overwhelming firepower supported by overwhelming logistics. For every shooter out there, every man with a gun, there are hundreds behind supporting, providing the ammunition, the boots, the gas for the tanks, the oil.
This is not about one president or one party. We fight as a nation because we perceive it is in our interest to fight. And we then mention words like freedom and nice common values.
What are we fighting for? Why do we bury our sons and brothers in lonely graves far from home? Our men are dying to preserve a way of life. These privileges, these rights, they're precious enough to fight for, precious enough to die for.
Who can be against freedom when, in fact, much more has been going on privately?
The President has asked Congress for $401.7 billion for fiscal year 2005.
Our country spends more on defense than all of the other 18 members of NATO, plus China, Russia.
From my standpoint, I think numbers almost are distracting.
What is it good for?